Get good. The mantra of Souls veterans. It is a mindset that any obstacle, no matter how difficult, is a simple skill issue. Nothing more, nothing less. When we, as players, take issue with some perceived injustice in game, we are often met with this rhetoric. This boss is literally impossible. Get good. The game doesn't let me play my way. Get good. Invaders have a huge skill advantage. Wait, what? You mean to tell me one non-exclusive group of players are of definitively higher skill than everyone else? That doesn't sound right. Do invasions have some sort of skill requisite or test you have to take? Are only the best players allowed to invade? Did they all just start that way, or did playing PvE somehow get them to a point of such high skill that it just sort of carried over? How can invaders automatically have a skill advantage? I'm being intentionally reductive, but I want to get my point across. Skill is an uncertain and often irrelevant component of invasions. Let me explain. First, I want to focus on defining skill in Elden Ring when talking about invasions. In PvP, skill means playing well and outplaying your opponent by mechanical efficiency, seizing advantages, and general know-how, along with a bunch of other things. It's the essence of what separates good players from bad players. A player who parries another might be exceptionally skilled, having learned the signs of what to look for and when to time it just right for a big payoff. But they might just be a low-skill parry spammer, pressing the button at every opportunity and hoping to get lucky. The difference is in their efficiency, even when the final result is the same. Skill is held as both a virtue and a contention. Being skilled is a good thing when establishing the perspective of the victor. You won because you were the most skilled. You deserved it. You earned it. In the same conversation, the defeated might paint them as cheesy or cheap, exploiting mechanics to outplay someone by any means necessary. The only skills on display in their mind are obsession and shamelessness. But skill isn't just playing well, it's playing smart too. A skilled invader knows when to press their advantage and when to retreat, and the same is true of any skilled player. One does not simply walk into the blender. Death comes swift to those without tact. Even more, skill is not always obvious. Was that invader really so skilled that they knew every move you were going to make before you made it? Or were they just lucky on the first trade and had some favorable latency? The game sets you up to know as little as possible about your opponent other than what you can observe firsthand, so we should probably take that as a sign that skill may not be the most important factor when considering how the game wants us to view invasions. Of course, it could just be that the game is failing to deliver the intended experience. Alas, this is the game we have. Skill simply defines how well we play it. So we can establish what skill means, but what role does skill play in determining the fairness of invasions? The complaint that invaders have the skill advantage is one of many tethered to the discussion of fairness in PvP. How is it fair that a game would let a player of high skill fight against a player of low skill? Shouldn't there be some degree of safeguard in place to avoid these scenarios? Let's look at where this mindset draws its most valid points. Invading is an optional mechanic where a player voluntarily attacks another. This suggests a willful aggression, and in order to do so competently, a certain degree of competency might be helpful. In short, they know what they're doing and are therefore more likely to do it well. I think that's a perfectly fair argument, but it obviously has some blind spots. For one, we can say things are likely, but we can never say always when we're talking about human players. Any player would benefit from high skill in almost any situation, but that doesn't mean they have it. Another issue I take is that there is an implication of skill being the most useful aspect, rather than tactics or equipment. Using good equipment well is no doubt a skill, but there are many options that arguably require very little skill to use to great effect. Elden Ring in particular is guilty of introducing a number of extremely high lethality ashes of war that will kill an unprepared player with near certainty. Skill might be nice, but who needs it when you can L2 your way to victory? Back to another valid point, invasions have been present since Demon Souls 15 years ago, so there's a not insignificant chance that someone invading in Elden Ring has been invading for a long time, if we make the assumption that a large portion of the cooperating player base is relatively inexperienced. A skill gap can be easily presumed. I think this point encapsulates what I find so specifically enticing about invasions and why I like skill as a determining factor. Skill is a self-governing determiner. No one else can conventionally invalidate your own skill. You are as good as you make yourself. There are, of course, imbalances in the game that diminish the role of skill in these encounters, but you can always be more skilled, and that's a worthwhile investment for my money. I think that's the essence of growing as a gamer. You play a game and you learn to play it well. The more you play, the better you get. Where a build is representative of the character, skill is representative of the player. But that's not where people take issue with skill. When people complain about the skill gap in Invasions, they don't think people shouldn't be skilled. They're arguing that Invasions should match players by skill level. It's an interesting idea, to be sure, but I find it fundamentally misguided. If there were a competent arena or other matchmaking system with brackets and ranks and all the usual trappings of modern competitive multiplayer, I would find matching by skill to be perfectly reasonable. But that's not only not something the game facilitates, it's not what an invasion is. Invasions are not merely a test of skill, they are a trial by fire, an uncertain occurrence with uncertain odds. It's not the most skilled player that prevails, but the most prepared, or the luckiest, or the cheapest, or the meanest. Invasions embrace chaos more than anything. Skill is a helpful asset, no doubt, but skill is not the sole determining factor. As an invader, you are subject to reduced healing and a statistically probable level disadvantage. This is intentional. You will also be outnumbered in a vast majority of scenarios. This is also intentional. Higher skill can help to compensate for these disadvantages, but what's more helpful is coming with the right tools for the job. I think there's an argument to be made for knowing what to bring being a skill in and of itself, but that's something that any YouTube tutorial could also provide. In any case, I want to focus on how invasions function. Invasions do not have a ranked system. Your KD ratio is not recorded. There are no brackets or tiers, only level and upgrade ranges. Because of the lack of measurable metrics, I find it common in the community to conflate being low level with being low skill. This is a primary criticism against twinks. High skill players with high power gear invading low skill players with low power gear. I think the gear assessment, where true, is perfectly valid. The skill variance, however, seems less so. Every character starts at low level. No matter how good a player might be, they start with the same tools as everyone else. So does that make everyone low skill? I would argue that invaders make more characters than anyone, so they might be the most likely low-level characters around, suggesting they might be the lowest skill of all. While I don't think that last bit is actually true, you can see how conflating player skill and character level is tough to justify without a lot of guessing and anecdotal speculation. But to turn the argument on its head, I want to point out another often stated criticism of invaders, particularly when discussing twinks. That twinks, with their superior gear, invalidate the skill of the invaded player. That no matter how good the host is, a twink will always beat them due to nothing more than their more powerful build. So which is it? Are invaders more skilled, or is it all determined by build? Or is it just that players really hate to lose and they'll blame anything but themselves? I jest. But seriously, I want to strike at the heart of this idea. Being pitted against players of uncertain skill is a cornerstone of invasions. It's a big part of what makes them so unique and so interesting. I am speaking as someone who genuinely hates dueling. I have no interest in the back-and-forth spacing war that is eking out narrow victories over someone in a game where hundreds of millisecond delays and regular desync are the norm. The foundation is so shaky that the idea of skill being the deciding factor is almost laughable when we think about just how inconsistent each match can be. Sure, if you can get on perfect latency and everything goes just so, a skill gap can be an incredible difference, but if you're fighting someone skating around at random and not taking damage until seconds after a hit, I'd hardly call that a skill issue. Invading takes the rocky platform From Software has built and says, okay kid, I trust you. It's where I think Souls multiplayer is at its best, where skill and luck and build and timing and patience and God knows what else are all mixed together in a soup of chaos and fury. To assert that skill should be a factor in invasion matchmaking undercuts how invasions operate. To imply that an invader should have to fight 3 people of equal skill who have every other advantage possible is to suggest the invader should just die. It's a complete dismissal of the game mode, and I suspect that's the point. But invading has never been about just skill, nor should it be. It's about everything. And let's not forget another major factor in matchmaking. You cannot choose your target. You have no control beyond character and upgrade level ranges over who you invade. You just press the button and the game matches you with presumably the first available target. You can't even select regions. I think this should tell us so much about the expectation From Software has for invasions. They are random from top to bottom. Everything from equipment to skill level is completely up to each individual player, and that's something that makes the system great. But is that fair? Is it fair to match people of different skills together? Does it matter that invasions are multifaceted? On the one hand, it's fair because you sign up for invasions when you participate in multiplayer. You choose to get involved, and what happens is fair by the logic of the game. On the other hand, f that. Getting sandbagged by some troglodyte who has been fighting since the dawn of time is the farthest f***ing thing from fair. But really, the answer is simple. Fairness in-game is not always defined by equality. The game has allowed the variance in skill and build and equipment to be the deciding factors in what happens in an invasion, and that, in and of itself, is fair. There are enemies and an entire world acting as obstacles to a host player, and they receive help from their cooperators. Invasions are just another piece of that ridiculous puzzle. So when we encounter an invader who is beating us through skill alone, that's something we should appreciate. The idea that they've played the game enough to beat us at our most advantaged is not something we should ridicule, it's something we should aspire to. We can dismiss them as tryhards or no-lifers or chuds, but what we should really be doing is climbing down into the sewers ourselves to see if there's any leftover nuclear waste. Or we can say we don't really care about getting better and just want to get through. I want to emphasize that there is no virtue to being good or bad at a game or a specific game mode. Not everyone is going to want to spend their time on a single game and learn every trick and technique. Some people just want to beat it and move on. And for those people who aren't looking for a mainstay, I understand the frustration. Invasions are disruptive, and the idea that somebody with 10,000 hours in the series shows up in your world with the sole intention of destroying you can be pretty discouraging. But I want to tell you, don't give up, Skeleton. If you're the sort of person that wants to play these games, I encourage you to not pick and choose what you like until you've tried every flavor. If you just want to co-op with your friends and don't care about getting good, no one has any business telling you you can't play that way. Just understand that the game allows you to be invaded and there's no consideration for skill in matchmaking. If that trade-off isn't acceptable to you, you might want to reconsider your game choice. Or, to be as helpful as I can be, consider how a little bit of skill can go a long way. These games have their best features in how simple some of the actions are to pull off. Learning to recognize attack patterns and how to do just a little bit of roll catching can go a long way against an invader. A halfway competent host who is willing to fight can get a lot done, especially when they've got a similar caliber of teammate. Invaders don't have many innate advantages, so if you can play just well enough to punish over-aggression, it can turn the tables more easily than you might think. And all of this is to say you should enjoy the game the way you want. I don't want anyone to think they have to like or appreciate invasions. I just want to encourage people to give them as many chances as they can stand. Elden Ring in particular has made invasions less than their full potential, and if we want them to improve, the community needs to show more interest. From Software are the only people truly responsible for the experience, and I, for one, would like to see it better than it is. And to everyone else who still thinks invasions are an unnecessary or bad mechanic, I implore you to reconsider. Elden Ring and all of the Souls games have many qualities beyond invasions, but we can't pretend invasions aren't among them. I'll argue to the ends of the earth that invasions are a vital part of the game, and playing without them makes it at least a little bit lesser. You may disagree with me, but I'll just keep trying to convince you. Rise if you would, for that is our curse. That's it for part 2. If you haven't seen part 1, maybe go back and check it out. The next part of this series should be out next week, possibly already out depending on when you're watching this. If you liked the video, please consider liking and subscribing, maybe leave a comment pointing out all the things I missed or misrepresented. Video engagement is a key metric in my self-worth, so if you want me to keep making videos, I'm gonna need you to validate my existence as often as possible. Thank you for watching.